Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank. I'm here with Dr. Valerie.
Hi.
Welcome back.
So glad to be back.
It's been a journey. We've been talking for almost 2 years. Like I was just talking to you off air. I was reminiscing. So I was listening to our first episode. I was like, what haven't I really asked you yet? Because I know we talked about the Iliad and then we talked a little bit deeper into that. And then on your second episode, we still kind of talked about, I would say, not really it seems like, selfishly, probably for me, I've been asking a lot of my own personal questions when it comes to kind of like life. Was it similar back then to similar now? But I wanted to take it a little bit of a different direction, since like our third chat just had nothing to do with ancient topics. We were just talking about kind of the state of what everything is. And I wanted to talk to you about Arabic poetry, because you also research into that and work, and you translate that, don't you?
Well, I wish I could. Let's put it that way. What I do is on one of my Instagram accounts, which is Dr. Valerie's in, every Wednesday I translate a proverb from Arabic into English, and I just make it like an Instagram post, and I usually have some thoughts about it or just the reasons that I was drawn to that week and post it. And it's been something that I started as a way to kind of hold myself accountable to keep studying Arabic, because when the pandemic happened, all of my plans for like doing additional language studies or perhaps going to the Middle East again kind of got put indefinitely on hold. And I thought, well, I need to do something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm going to forget everything that I learned. So this is what I started to do, and I'm still doing it, which is kind of amazing, because I found this book on archive.org. It's a collection of Arabic proverbs, which is just called Arabic Proverbs, in Latin, and it was written by a German academic named Freytag, and he wrote it in the mid-19th century, and he collected 3 volumes of Arabic proverbs, and he translated them all with notes into Latin. So if I get stuck, I read the Latin because it's something that I have more experience in, actually. And it's really interesting because it's just such a broad selection of different things. Some of them I think are really inspiring. Like I have one on my phone as my phone background. I don't know if you can see.
Oh yeah.
But I took one of them and I just sort of put purple on there because purple is my favorite color.
Hence my background.
What it means is bright lights shine even in dark times. And when I came across that, actually it was before the pandemic and everything, but I was really unsure about what I was doing next. And I guess if it doesn't sound too cringy, it spoke to me, and I made it into a phone background, and I've had it on my phone ever since.
I don't think it's too cringy at all. I think if you have something that you're passionate about and you want to research into, the only person that can really judge you is really yourself. Nobody's other really points of interest or anybody's points of view onto what you enjoy, they don't really matter that much. It's really just on the basis of what makes you happy. And I think that's really the overall question I've kind of been trying to search for like the longest time. And I'm pretty sure I'll probably never have an answer for it, which is okay. But I think it's interesting because it's something I don't know anything about really, especially when it comes to anything that really happens to do with older poetry. I mean, we mentioned the Iliad before. I was reading more into that and I was like, well, I can start seeing where you were talking about in our first episode. You were kind of filling in the blanks for me there because I really didn't have a total idea. I mean, I think we all get really kind of sales pitched a very minuscule thing, and it happens to be a larger scale. And the way that you've probably dived into it, do you find that like with creativity that you have to go through a certain amount of pain to be able to experience something or be able to write about something? Or do you find that maybe like even if with your basis of just reading some of this poetry or being able to kind of be involved in this at all, anything that happens to do with this kind of category in a sense, do you find that it's more about the hard times? Because I know there's a quote out there like soft times or soft men create easy times create hard men create quick, something of that sort. I don't know if you've ever heard that quote before. I completely just butchered it.
Oh, yeah, no, I think it's hard men create good times create soft men create hard times, and then the circle
Yeah.
continues. Yeah, no, I've seen that all over the internet recently. Because I think it's something that a lot of people are thinking about, at least here in this country, where, I think a common view is the baby boomers had a really easy life. They grew up in unprecedented economic prosperity, and when the United States was a major world power, and they were told they could do anything that they wanted. And at least the early boomers, so people born, right after the war, they were also coming into the job market when there was massive expansion in different areas, right? So different industries and even academia, with the expansion of like community college systems and local college systems, which were at that point state funded, especially in California, where my family's from, meant that there were a lot of local jobs for people who did a lot of different things. And even my parents, who are later boomers, talk about like just walking down the street downtown in Honolulu, and a friend comes up to my mom and says, "Hey, I'm going to change jobs. Would you like my old job? I think you'd be good at it, and I think you'd get along in that office. And would you like to just go and apply?" And she's like, "Well, actually, I'm looking for a job, so that's cool." And basically, she just walks into this office and gets this job. And as somebody who's been on the job market for more years than I'd like to remember, that story just sounds like unbelievable.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
community growth through community and or community growth that benefits community enhancement, but it community kind of acting as a community, not really in separate. And I think that's just been a product of, for the longest time, we've been kind of worried about ourselves in a sense of trying to find our way of succeeding and getting the spotlight or getting whatever attention that a lot of people really want, or just being able to survive in a sense. It kind of seems like survival. You have to kind of have, there's like this
Yeah, I think that's true.
there's a mentality out there that's kind of like, do whatever you got to do to make it to the top, no matter how hard it is. And it's kind of like this intent of like stepping on something else. And then you kind of really start noticing, I think, from a grander view with the amount of exposure that social media has, is that there's not just more than one battle going on, much like the Iliad. There's the ones with the gods, there's multiple other little battles that are happening all at once. And I think now people are kind of noticing it, but still falling into the same thing of trying to make sure that they're worried about themselves in a sense, even though there's this idea that, you got to protect someone by doing this or getting this certain shot. And it's like, it seems like it's a giant feud over nothing, which I'm wondering, like, for the Iliad, for instance, because like I said, I've been reading that. It's if it's multiple battles in one, there's not just between these certain sides, there's gods interfering, and there's a whole different play that's kind of going out into thing. You can kind of examine that in today's times as well too, that there's not just a battle between you and some other person, there's not a battle between you and the competition, there's a battle between you and yourself in a sense as well too. And not only with you and yourself, also with the fact of the battle of your future self, your past self, your present self. Sometimes you don't understand your present self, and sometimes you're afraid of your future self, and also you're worried about your past self. You're scared of maybe a mistake or something that you did that might have put you on the wrong track, that's going to interfere with all those present and future tenses. Which it gets, I mean, I'm throwing us down a weird rabbit hole, but I start getting into this idea of like a lot of people, you can blame the older generations, and in some part you have points, or there might be points that are right for blaming them as well too. But do you see the essential growth, or do you see the negative decline of just resorting to a blame type of personality, which I've been at fault myself for even doing at times too, saying I'm not in the position I'm in because of the cards that I've been dealt, or these types of things? I mean, in a sense, it just makes you contemplate and try and analyze your own life a little bit more, to be like, well, if I can sit here and keep complaining on it, is it ever going to change? Or if I sit there and do something, will something change? I don't want to turn it into like a motivational thing, but it's like this grander kind of thing in a sense. And I keep saying the word thing. I'll try not to do it again for the rest of the show, but I don't know. It has me questioning more. I think that's why from our past couple episodes, I've always tried to examine the past, and I do it a lot, mostly to try and find kind of an understanding of now. If this is something different that we're experiencing, it is something different, but different doesn't have to be scary. Different doesn't have to just be something that's completely brand new. It's also might be a sense of that you might have started on the wrong foundation, and it's time to make another one, for a sense, for a different time period. It's surprisingly, as much, I guess, different as we are, we're still in the same sense exactly how we were back into the, I guess, back 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Just the technology around us is different. The environment's different.
Well, human nature, I think, is pretty constant. I mean, we're all
Valerie,
dealing with
real
different
quick, you see
things.
this headphone piece? It's
Hmm.
scratching against your sweater.
Oh, sorry.
You're good.
I
I wanted to say something earlier, but I didn't want to pause it. So
Oh,
I felt,
okay.
I'm sorry.
So I'm just wondering how I'm gonna stop that from happening. Let's see if I move this cord like this. Is that gonna make it worse or better? Oops, sorry.
It's going to be
All right,
uncomfortable for you.
it's gonna be a
I
little
would
bit
just say,
weird.
just careful when you move your head around. You'll
Be
scratch the.
careful.
Yeah.
Okay, I can try to be careful. All right. So you can tell I don't know anything about being on video. Um, but I mean, we're all humans. And I think that's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to this giant collection of Arabic proverbs that I was just talking about, because it seems to me like there's a proverb for every situation. And not to be all motivational, because I don't always like that when people are like that to me, but in a way, when you read some of these proverbs and they're dealing with these different, extreme situations, like the difference between fear and disappointment. I was looking at a proverb that was talking about fear and disappointment the other day, and it basically said, um, "I'm I'm coming to you for support because I'm disappointed." Um, this isn't fear, because someone who's reached um, the point where he's afraid realizes that fear is nothing. So the grammar was a little bit tricky, but what I didn't do a translation of that one for Instagram yet, because I wasn't quite sure how to put it clearly into English. But I think the idea is pretty clear, right? Here's someone who's coming to someone else for support, and he's saying, I'm not afraid, right? Don't think that I'm afraid. I'm disappointed. It's different. I don't need your support because I'm backing away from something because I don't know what's going to happen. I'm disappointed, not afraid.
Do you find that most of the types of poems that you're coming across, or the works that you're coming across, that they have to deal in a certain realm? Like, are they dealing more on the depressive side? Or are they dealing more of the enthusiastic side on life? Just because I'm wondering, because I mean, it can go either way. I mean, like we were talking about hard times and good times, or bad times, or you start to realize that's the situation that you're in, and that's all you kind of think about, which means anything that you really create is going to be on that concept. Like, for instance, the best part about this show being conversation is it's capturing you in whatever moment you're feeling at the time that we record it. That's much like a poem. When it's written, in a sense, if a person's going through a really tough time, they're going to create something that might be strong and might be kind of depressing for a lot of people who aren't experiencing that situation, but then it resonates with a large
Mhm.
amount of people in that situation. For instance, I think most of the work since like the start of 2021 has been some type of like cry for depression or cry for help out there, in a sense of like, I'm still joking, so you guys don't worry about me, but it's still like, okay, like you'll get a maybe a message here or something there, because everyone's kind of not really doing okay. They're kind of going through the ringer a little bit, which makes these, it makes the environment like that. I think there was music, for instance, of the 90s or the 2000s, Green Day, all that teenage angst. You're listening to it afterwards, you're like, I just want to fucking sleep. It's like, why? It's like, because everything you're listening to is that type of vibe of like, I hate my parents. I can't believe my Beamer won't start. Like, it's just stupid stuff like that. And then now we're in this point where you're seeing a lot of poetry, you're seeing things of sadder songs, you're seeing more of an overall capture of emotion, in the sense that depression is probably one of the strongest ones or easiest ones to tap into, considering that I could tell you right now, explain to me what being happy is like. It's hard to find words to describe what being happy is like. But if I asked you to describe me of what feeling angry is like or what feeling sad is like, you could do that with ease. Because more times than not, you've probably felt sad or angry more than you felt happy. And it's hard to realize when you are happy to remember what that feeling is like so you could describe it to me. You know what I'm saying? Or am I going
Yeah,
off on a
I no,
tangent?
no, I do. I completely do. And I think first of all, with these proverbs, because there are a lot of proverbs. I mean, I've been going through, I'm only on the second volume, and I've been doing this project with one proverb a week for 2 years now, basically. So there are a lot of them, and a lot of them that I skip because I want to post things on Instagram that I think people can relate to. So there are some that have to do with, like desert warfare and kind of diplomacy that are interesting, but I don't think they really kind of fit the vibe of my Instagram account. So I skip over those and I look at different ones. I think there are a lot of them that are kind of, I wouldn't say like depressive, but they deal with, where they reflect on more difficult emotions. But I think there are a lot of happy ones too. There are a lot of confident ones where people say, you know what, this is who I am and this is who I'm going to be. Or there's one that says, the old chest, I think it's something like that, or the old container contains something really beautiful. So don't judge a book by its cover, right? We would say in English. Just because something doesn't look really beautiful on the outside doesn't mean that there isn't something amazing on the inside, right? So I think these proverbs kind of span the whole range of human emotions. But I think also what you said about you don't really know what happiness is until it's gone is particularly true. And there was a line, I haven't actually watched any of the real episodes because we don't have Netflix, but I watched a couple of clips from The Crown now and then on YouTube. They come up in my recommended. And I remember um, there was an episode where after Kennedy and his wife visit Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, um, not too long after, he's assassinated, right? And they get the news from America and they turn on the TV and they see everything. And, this really affects Queen Elizabeth because she's still quite young, and the show wants you to think that there's like an emotional connection between Queen Elizabeth and Jackie Kennedy because they were both shy people, put in these really high positions in their societies. And then after all of this, Elizabeth's kind of reflecting and she turns to Philip and she says, well, that's the thing about happiness, you know, it seems like misery and until you wake up and you realize that things have gotten worse. Because I guess she's sort of thinking that she and Mrs. Kennedy were unhappy in some ways in their roles, but now here she is, you know, suddenly a widow with two small children. And what's worse, feeling like as a shy person, you're not fully equipped to be first lady, or suddenly being a widow. So that's what I just thought of.
When taking it back to some of the poems, for instance, you mentioned something about like you didn't feel like it was for your account. Do you ever are you ever afraid to, even if it resonates with you, to post something because you're afraid of the followers might not necessarily like it or agree with it? Which is, it's not uncommon for people to do that. There's very common people be go like, this is my motivational page, it'll be nothing but motivation. But do you ever feel like you're, even though if you see a something, like if I was going to ask you right now whether it's on your page or not, if there was a poem that really resonated with you, or one that you just find really kind of took your breath away in a sense, maybe one of your favorite ones, could you be able to tell me what that is? And also, is it on your page or not? Are you afraid that it might not be equipped for your page? Because I feel like you got to build a following of what you find interesting, not just for what you think people might be interested in.
Oh, I completely agree. I think that if I did come across something that I really liked, I would share it, especially on the Proverbs page, because I think that the people who are there, they are interested in not just the Proverbs themselves, but also how I filter through them and put them online and translate them into English. Um, so I think they'd be open to, you know, reading the caption and reading my thoughts and sort of seeing how that all adds up. Um, when I said that I skip over a lot of them, I think mostly it's because I don't necessarily know right away what to do with them. Not that they're not valuable in a way, right? But they're not, I don't necessarily understand them, because there are some proverbs that have to do with like firing an arrow, and I don't really know very much about archery, and I don't really know very much about the kind of archery that they did, and I'm not really sure like what the different terms mean in Arabic versus Latin versus English. So you know, it's not really something that I'm going to put on there, because part of what I'm doing with this page is just trying to see if I can go through something and just get drawn to something and then translate it and post it. Because I think a lot of people think that texts like these from an older time, or like with Greek works and ancient time, are things that you can't really just relate to. And I want to show that that's not necessarily the case, that a lot of these things are really relatable, even to us. So I'm not really doing this. I mean, I am an academic person, and I don't think I would have had this project idea if I weren't. But I'm not really doing this in an academic way exactly. Sometimes I take a few liberties with the translation. Not that I make stuff up, but like if the proverb is talking about a man, there was one proverb that comes to mind, and I translated it as she's going back to her own style. And it was actually talking about a guy, because you can tell from the language. And I thought, yeah, okay, but most of these proverbs talk about men, and this is talking about somebody who is going back to doing things the way he wants to do them. And I just thought that the there was a good parallel there with, you know, a woman who just wants to wear what she wants to wear and do what she wants to do. So that's how I translated it. And I wrote that in the caption. I said, you know, this isn't exactly what the proverb says, but this is how I want to interpret it.
Hmm.
So
Well,
it's
do you get the time periods with these transcripts that come through? Like, do you ever see when this was created or what time this was created, and then try and like, I would say, correlate that with anything maybe that was happening in the area at the time? Like, if you're going through the whole town's going through a famine or something like that, you're probably going to come across a lot of writing or something that would happen to do with like luxurious food or something that it seems like they were obviously craving or hungry or something that was causing them to think about this, and that's why they necessarily wrote about it.
I really wish there were more information on the different time periods, but there's not. Sometimes the proverbs are attributed to specific people, historical people in that area, but there's not a lot of detailed information about different time periods. I mean, you can sort of date it with the language, but that's very broad. You can basically say, this isn't modern Arabic that people would use today. Um, so sort of, but not really. And I wish there were more. Of course, I also wish that I knew more about the text and about how it was compiled. I think you find with a lot of these earlier um, philological works that people sort of went to other places in the world and said, okay, I'm collecting proverbs or I'm collecting poems. Tell me what you know. And they'd come across people often kind of randomly in their travels and just record what the people said. And there wasn't sort of this idea that you had to be really careful about, okay, do you remember where this is from? Or let's do some research. It was very kind of like, oh, that one? Okay, I'll write it down. um, so I'm not sure if it would be possible to give like precise
Yeah.
time periods to different proverbs, but that's true in English and in any language,
You're talking
really.
about more of like a scramble for content. There's a lot of context I would say that's missing. Because I mean, it's going to be hard. It's like for archaeologists trying to be able to discover something from back in the past. They can try and date it, but it's a broadband view. You don't have an accurate, I guess, depiction of when it was. What's the context of this? You kind of just have the work that's there, and you kind of have to go with that, and that's really it.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good image, actually, because I do feel like a textual archaeologist. I'm reading a work that was well, at least the first volume was published, I want to say, in 1860.
Where are you finding these at?
Archive.org. So it's been around since the beginning of the internet. It's just a giant database of stuff that's out of copyright. And I was just searching around, actually, when I was still in Saudi Arabia, looking for different collections of Arabic proverbs, because I went to our local bookstore and I only found one, and it was very small. And I thought, well, this isn't exactly what I wanted. And so I looked online and I found this. And so I think, yeah, the first volume was published in 1838. The second volume was published in 1839. And I haven't gotten anything from the third volume yet. But that was probably 1840, I guess.
I mean, are they that
So,
far off from even a couple hundred years ago? Are they still hitting the nail on the head? I would say in a lot of, I guess, I'm not trying to relate it again to what's happening now, but it just maybe a capture of emotion.
oh, I definitely, like, as I said, the one on my phone that I made into a phone background is one of my favorites. Even in dark times, bright lights shine. It's a lot of them really capture moments of emotion that I think are very clear, and that anybody who's been through anything can relate to. The first one I translated way back in the beginning of the project was um, words like this, they're like magic. And that didn't get a lot of response. It might have been because my account was still relatively new, or it might have been because that wasn't what people were looking for when they came across it. But I really liked it to open the project, because I thought, when people condense emotions or events down to like a few words, because that's what these proverbs are. They're not entire poems. Sometimes they're based on longer poems, which Freytag, the compiler, quotes at length, both in Arabic and then in a Latin translation. But something that's condensed, sort of like, like a motivational phrase or quote or something. I think that just shows that it means something to people, and it's something that people can pass along. And if you think about the overall cultural context back then, in the Middle East, being able to both read and write was a pretty specialized skill, right? So a lot of people were semi-literate or completely illiterate, and a lot of information was memorized and passed on orally. So people would memorize poems and pass them on, or messages. And so I just think of these proverbs like little notes being passed around to people over time.
Well, that a lot that's I guess in part with their education, for instance, is because a lot of their education and culture, I would say, was lost in a sense. They don't really have, I guess, the roots of it. I mean, they have like basic understandings, but it's not really taught in a wholeness. Like if you look at Japan's history, for instance, Japan has a 5,000-year-old history. They are doing things they don't remember why they're doing them, but it's also ingrained to them that to be part of the culture aspect of things. And for somewhere in the Middle East, it's kind of like they lost a lot of their culture. You can blame us for that. You can blame multiple other factors for that as well too.
Well, now this is pretty far from anything I did in my PhD, but since 2019, I have been looking at Arabic and Arabic poetry, and I've read a lot of the works of Dr. Saad Suwayan, who is a Saudi anthropologist. He's recently retired, but he still writes things and has a website. So if you Google him, you can find his stuff. He writes in English and in Arabic. Saadsowy, Wayan,
So
sorry.
you said Dr. Sad?
Dr. Saad, so like sad with two A's, Saad, and then Sowayan in English. And if you put that into Google, you'll find his website and you'll find some of the things I'm going to talk about. But he has a short article on there where he talks about the traditional oral poetry of the Bedouin, which is called Nabati poetry in Arabic, and how he thinks it's a lot like the Homeric poems, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and a lot of the ancient literature that we have from Greece and Rome.
Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
I am seeing black.
It should pop up in just a second. Or it's not going to let
me. Maybe my computer is slow. Oh, yes,
that
is his website. Excellent.
So where exactly are you about to talk about from?
So I am about to talk about the one that says new, studying Nabati poetry. There's the little guy that says new. Yeah. So this is the article version of a talk that he gave at NYU Abu Dhabi, which if you put his name into YouTube, you can pull up and see. And he gave this talk, I believe, in 2015. And this is what set me on this whole journey with Arabic poetry, because when I finished my thesis defense, of course, it was a major moment in my life and I was kind of exhausted. But when I woke up from my 3-day nap, I had this feeling that I didn't really convince my committee of my point, which was that the most important theme in the Oresteia was the theme of music and the theme of the chorus of the Erinyes singing together, like in harmony, and being able to perform in that community. And I don't think everybody was really fully persuaded by my argument. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. And a lot of them go back to how the discipline of classics is really dominated by textual study. And I was arguing for something that's not in the written text. You can see glimpses of it when music and singing is discussed, but you can't see, like, it's like if you
You're kind of piecing together the context of it rather
right,
than
if you read a review of a musical, for example, online, if you read a review of Hamilton, you can picture it in your mind, but you won't really be able to fully experience the music and the dancing and everything, because you're not there, right? You're not watching it. You're reading a critic's review of it. So it's sort of like that. And I thought, well, maybe moving forward, if I really want to bring this point home, I should look for a living tradition of poetry that's performed for a community of people. And I, being a millennial, I just put a bunch of stuff into Google, and I came up with this talk of Dr. Suayan. And by the end of the talk, I was convinced that he was right, because his point is, if we gave all of the expertise and the time and the trouble and the study and the care to Bedouin poetry that we have given in the West to Homer, that we would see that, this is also an epic tradition, and this also has really clear cultural importance and lessons for humanity, and just, it's a rich tradition that everybody could learn from. And I thought, well, this seems right to me. I mean, at that point, I didn't really know very much Arabic, and I was, of course, a classicist, but everything that he was saying about classical culture was true and made sense. And I thought, well, maybe as a classicist, I should look at this, because I think I can bolster his argument. So I just sort of started wandering down this path of looking at Bedouin poetry. And of course he's right. This is the like the oral epic of oral epics of Bedouin, but it's even richer than that, because it survives to this day. So when we look at Homer, for example, we have the Iliad and the Odyssey, and we have other poems like the Battle of the Frogs and the Mice, which were in ancient times attributed to Homer. So people would say, well, this is an epic poem. This uses the right kind of language. We're going to say Homer wrote it. But in terms of what we know of the manuscript, it's much, much later than the Iliad or the Odyssey. So if you believe that there was a poet called Homer and he composed the Iliad and the Odyssey, it's not really possible that he also composed the Battle of the Frogs and the Mice. Also, the Battle of the Frogs and the Mice is basically like a comedy take on the Iliad, where instead of the Trojans versus the Greeks, it's the frogs versus the mice. And then
like a child's version.
Yeah, like a child's version, but it's got all the drama, right? Because there are different the mouse prince dies, and this leads the mice to declare war on the frogs because they let him drown, and the frogs know that the mice can't swim, and then it looks like the mice are going to win, but Zeus doesn't like that, so he sends down a bunch of crabs to fight on the side of the frogs, and then there's a stalemate. So it's
sounds like something out of like a religious text.
Well, maybe. I mean, I kind of think of it as like an ancient Disney movie.
That's what I'm thinking, but the way you described it with frogs and all this type of stuff, I'm like, this is like a biblical plague type talk, which makes me examine the Bible a little bit more closely now.
I mean, maybe, but it's so that there were a lot. I mean, the ancient world was a very different place, and people didn't look at things like, okay, can we prove that this author wrote this thing? They just went by, does it look like the same thing? Does it feel like the same thing? Does it have the same sort of language and tone? And if so, we're just going to put it in that pile. And a lot of Bedouin poetry is the same way. Um, it's extremely varied, and one of the volumes that I've been looking at is actually a collection of poems by a poet who died in the early 90s, so pretty modern, but he stubbornly clung to the old ways of living. Like, he wanted to keep herding his camels, and he wanted to sleep in a tent in the desert. He did not want to join his family in their apartment, and his nephews wanted him in his old age because he had, bad eyesight and arthritis and different health problems. They wanted him to run like uh, a small convenience store, basically like a corner shop. He would sell soda and candy and stuff to people where he could sit all day. But he didn't want to do that. He wanted to live with his camels. And he also composed poetry. And this was such a big part of his life that people called him a dindan, the one who always talks to himself, because that's how he would compose, the one who's always humming or talking to himself, because that's how
Crazy
he
person.
composed poetry. Kind of, but like
It's
a
either you're
sweet,
homeless or you have a Bluetooth. Those are the only two people that talk to each other.
an adorable, well, he was semi-homeless, right? Because when he was living, the Saudi government was trying to settle Bedouin into apartments and houses that they had built for them, right? They wanted to get them into sort of a settled modern lifestyle, for political reasons, but also, because living out in the desert is hard, and it leads to a lot of public health problems and other issues. And so they were just like, well, living a settled life in a house and having a job at like a convenience store is better than living out in the desert and sleeping in a tent and trying to, raise a small herd of camels. So Dindan, in refusing all of these modern comforts and conveniences, he was kind of acting like a homeless person. And in the introduction to this volume, which only exists because Marcel Kupashik, who was at that time working in the embassy in Riyadh, but he had this personal interest in poetry, Bedouin poetry. One of his friends said, well, I've got a guy you should meet, right? So when he didn't have anything to do in Riyadh, he went out into the desert to Wadi al-Dawasir, where Dindan lived. And his relatives complained about how stubborn he was and how he wanted to pretend that it was still the old days, but it's not. And he's got these health problems, but he doesn't care, he doesn't want to slow down and live a more comfortable modern life. He doesn't want to retire from being a Bedouin. And so Kupashik would actually have to sort of bribe him to get him to recite poetry. And one of the things was his nephews wanted him to sell his camels. And so Kupashik would buy food for the camels so that he wouldn't have to sell them as quickly. So he was kind of like a cantankerous, semi-homeless person.
Well, what's your interpretation of that?
Well, of course, there's no way I could have known him, because he died when I was a little kid, but I really relate to him now. I really like him as a person, having read a lot of this poetry. He's very stubborn, I'm stubborn. He's when he writes, he's writing about the desert. He's writing about his camels and about the old ways of life and how wonderful they are. And I mean, of course they're hard, you know, but they're also wonderful. He's talking about just, being in the quiet of the desert and thinking about his life, or thinking about how he feels, or remembering old comrades. Or there's this one poem where he's describing a messenger coming from Oman, because back then there were still messengers riding camels going from Oman, which is south of Saudi Arabia, into Saudi Arabia. Now I'm sure people would just WhatsApp each other,
Yeah.
but back then there was this messenger coming from Oman, and he's writing this whole poem describing how skilled the messenger is as a writer, and how fast the camel's going, and what a magnificent animal this camel is, and how well rider and camel relate to each other, and how they, you the desert trail, and how fast it's going, and how magnificent it all is. And it really draws you in to this scene. It's like you're there, it's like you're watching it, and then you think, whoa, yeah, that is really amazing, that
See,
people can do that.
people can take that, like the way I can kind of understand that in two different ways is one, that it's a person too stubborn to change or too stubborn to evolve and rather be stuck in the old times. But I like to think of it in the sense that you understand that the more that you add into your life, whether you accept a free home, a free apartment, you accept a new job, you accept to get rid of your old lifestyle for the new one, it's a change that you might necessarily be losing a piece of yourself with. And I know change is supposed to be about yourself, or change is supposed to be a different thing. It's a new life. Let's start over again. In a sense, there's a lot of crucial aspects that you miss, such like the light bulb, for instance. When you invented the light bulb, you started creating light pollution that took out the stars in the sky. So it gets harder and harder to see, and it only gets worse and worse and worse. I think it's at least that's the way I like to think of it, the way that you just said it, is a concept of not really wanting to be stuck in your old stubborn ways, but understanding kind of what was crucial about the older days. It might have been hard times. It might have not have been as easy as living in or sleeping on a Tempur-Pedic. Maybe it's harder sleeping in a tent, but it brings you more of a wholeness, and it also can help influence your creativity. When you're really looking at like the crucial aspects of like just sitting out on your porch or something like that and really hearing the sound of the earth rather than having your headphones in listening to a song or a podcast and enjoying the time outside, turning the radio off. I drive with the radio off. I don't like sound sometimes. I like to just listen to just the natural sound that's going on, whether it's either my car or whether it's the wind in the trees. Think that's what I'm understanding from what you kind of just read to, well, at least said to me. That was out of your mind. That wasn't in front of you on paper.
No, I'm just remembering what I've read from this introduction, because I have the book here in this room, but I don't need to get up and interrupt the conversation to go and get it. But I think Dindan would absolutely agree with you. And it's not like he rejected all aspects of modern society. He had a truck, he liked his truck. It was very useful for him. And actually, Marcel Kupashek paid a fair amount of money to get the truck some help, because it hadn't had an oil change in who knows how long.
It's
Stuff
just
like
about
that.
the excess that he was talking about. A lot of people add excess luxuries. If you have an Amazon Alexa, if you have all these things that make your life a little bit easier, even though you can manually do all those things as well too, necessarily you're losing a piece of yourself. That's kind of like the biggest fear. Like for instance, we were talking about poetry, being able to date it or not being able to date it, but it's something from the past that it can help relate to the future. It's evolved into a new form. If you look 100 years from now, what people will be examining, music videos. I watched a whole series this morning from Marshmello, or whoever that guy is that dresses up with the marshmallow head. He has a
Hmm.
bunch of his music songs that are not really vocals, but they're more beats, but each music video, like one is he's being bullied in school and someone videotapes him through his bedroom when he's able to let loose and create music. And next thing you know, his music's trending around school. Then all the people that are making fun of him are wearing the same headpiece as he is to help in support of him. I mean, it's capturing an essence of like a lot of tough things that people go through, very, very hard situations. I don't think it's ever going to be lost. I just think it's going to change form. It just how long until people start to adapt to that new form and really recognize it in front of them. I mean, I've been talking a lot about NFTs, art, like AI art. I've been creating a shit ton of AI art, and it's fucking amazing. It's nothing. I gave up painting because it's so good. There's no way if that thing can do that in 10 seconds, and it takes me months to be able to make a painting or something like that. It's just different. It's a new form. It might take a while to understand the emotion that's packed into it. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of the old style of doing it, but it's a new way of expressing yourself. It just the expression, how much are you willing to let go of the steering wheel, which is kind of like where I'm at, where I'm like, I don't really necessarily want to let something do it all for me. I still like the aspect of being able to rely on myself to be able to do a lot of things. And I think that's a crucial aspect that you can probably find in any story or any type of work throughout history. There is something there that is causing a person to go do something, whether it's a protagonist. That protagonist doesn't have to be protagonist is the enemy, right? That's not the I always get those two mixed.
Well, the protagonist is like the hero of the story, and
Okay,
the
then the
antagonist is
antagonist
like
is
the
what I'm talking about. The
yeah.
antagonist, there's an antagonist in anything, whether it's man against man, whether it's man against nature, whether it's man against ethereal being, whether it's man against whatever. That is like that here now. A lot of people try and narrow down what that antagonist is. Necessarily, it might be yourself in some sense. I mean, back to the beginning of what we were talking about in the thing, everyone's looking for a straw man. Everyone needs something, but I feel like that type of pressure creates more growth. Not like the quote of, oh, you need enough pressure to create a diamond, but more on the aspect of you need that kind of get your shit, get going, get this done. This has a time limit. There's these factors in society that used to always be there, whether it was the sun's going to go down and you can't hunt after dark. So you better get your food now or try your best to make sure, or you're going to go hungry. There were these crucial aspects in your life that caused you to be able to create something or do something. I feel like that's still here, but like I said, how much of the steering wheel are we willing to give up?
Well, you brought up a lot of really good points there, and I think I can take some of those themes and tie up all these threads as we start to finish up. Um, the first part is, yeah, absolutely. I agree that I think one of the reasons why Dindan wanted to stay in the desert was he thought that that environment was part of what inspired him and part of what made him a poet. So he didn't want to give up living there because he felt like, okay, this is too much of a part of myself and a part of what inspires me to be who I am, because he was so closely identified with everything that he created. He was known as, right, the guy who sings or hums. He was known as the poet, and everybody enjoyed his poetry, and he enjoyed sharing it. And he was willing, for example, to recite his poetry to a tape recorder, which is what Marcel Kupashek had at the time, because it was, 1989. um, and you can actually go, I will send you the link after we're done, but Brill, his publisher, has uploaded some of these tapes or portions of these tapes to the internet, so you can actually hear the recordings of Dindan reciting his own poetry, which I think is really cool. And back when I would go live and read some of it on Instagram, I would basically learn from him. Right. So listen to him reciting it and then try to teach myself how to do it. And of course I make mistakes, but I I just I enjoyed doing it for the time that I was doing it. And then you were saying, well, things are evolving. And in terms of Bedouin poetry, that's absolutely true, because a lot of it has moved online. So for example, on Instagram, I follow a lot of Bedouin poets who will just, like they'll be out or in their cars or whatever, and they'll just hit record on their phones and make a video of themselves reciting a poem. So if for Dindaan's poetry to be preserved, it took a Dutch diplomat coming to the desert with a tape recorder. Now everybody's got a phone.
Yeah.
So these people are creating poetry, and that they're creating their own, majlis or group of people on the internet. So there are lots of people who create poetry, well, of all kinds, but also of this type, to share online. And there's one account, Bint Al Asri, on Instagram, and this person is actually making recordings of his or her grandmother. I don't know, you don't see their faces. They're basically just like sitting around the living room, and they'll make a recording of like the coffee table or something, but you can hear her voice. And some of these poems are poems that she remembers from earlier times, and some of them are poems that she creates like for the National Day, or for some current celebration. So it's not always looking back into the past. And I think that's really amazing and really inspiring, because so much of the dialogue around social media is how it's bad influence, right? So
Do you
I
find
think
that
that's
this, or I guess really diving into this, at least since you started your research from the way beginning, do you find that it's really enhanced your own intelligence, not just by learning new things, but also like it's maybe crafted out your thoughts in a new direction, kind of taken them on a different path than maybe if you would have never kind of read into this at all? Because I find when I soak myself up with some older style of history, or I start exploring a little bit deeper, whether it's political or not, it kind of starts consuming my mind a little bit. And then it's really all I can think about. And I mean, it's not necessarily bad. Sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes it really creates and maybe might mature you in a sense, not necessarily negatively, more in a positive light, where you'll see. I mean, I feel bad for any future historian that's going to have to look back at this digital footprint that everybody has left out there, because there's so much out there that can either get taken. This meme was originally yours, now it's somebody else's, and then someone's doing a Facebook live and you forget what they said in that. I mean, half the times I ramble off a quote in this thing and someone's like, that should be a quote. I'm like, you're going to have to find it, because I'm not going to write it down. I'm not making a book. It makes it more difficult, but I also think it leaves a lot of hidden, I guess, pleasures out there. For instance, if somebody's listening to something, even though it wasn't put into a book, not everything needs to be put into a book. But if something's just said in a moment in a conversation, or something is just said, whether it's recorded or not, or whether it's put up in a tweet or not, and someone sees it, it could really resonate with that one person. And it's kind of like a hidden pleasure, which makes it, I mean, you don't want to plan it intended. Like, you don't want to be like, this episode, I filled a bunch of truth bombs. No, you want to have it like just a regular thing. And then someone comes across like, this is like a hidden gem. There's plenty of hidden gems out there, whether you find a record in a record store that you never thought would be there. You go to a thrift shop and you find a half off Bill Cosby sweater. I don't know. But it's those little like hidden gifts that I feel like you'll come across a lot, especially when it comes to works of art, which I think is kind of what you've kind of done. You've come across something that really resonates with you, and not only resonates with you, but can also be a voice for a lot of people out there who have never heard of such a thing. That's why I was so interested in talking about it, because I didn't know about this whole world of it. And I figured that the best way to really understand something is to talk to someone who really enjoys it and get their kind of perspective on it, because I can just come across it on my own and I won't give it the time of day. But if you find someone who can really explain it to you in a sense, and I like talking to you too, it comes out in a better way for me to understand it, which makes me want to go check out the site that I pulled up earlier and be able to look through some of the work.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that. And to answer your question, absolutely. When I first started down this path, as I said, it was more in the sense of, where do I go after finishing my PhD, what's my next project? How do I take these ideas that I have and communicate them to this audience that I had for my PhD in a better way, in a clearer way? And as I've gone forward, partly because of the way the world's turned out with not being able to travel and things like that, and also the fact that I haven't had an academic job since my PhD, I've really been extremely online with all of this research. And one of the things that has created for me is this atmosphere where I can basically do what I want. I'm creating my own audience, and I just share things because I like them, like you said. And when I was reading poems from this volume of Dindan's poetry on Instagram Live, um, I found that people were tuning in who were just like, wow, I really like this. I'm not looking at it as an example of oral poetry, like I was originally, right? Because the Homeric poems are originally oral poems, so they were composed in a similar way to Dindan composing his poems, we think. So not by somebody who knew how to read and write, but somebody who was thinking and improvising lines on the spot that were then ultimately written down many generations later, because this poem resonated with so many people. So it became less and less an academic thing for me, and just more of like, wow, this is amazing. I want to share it with people. And I'm not an expert in it at all. I'm still learning Arabic, and I don't have any degrees that would equip me to do any of this work on my own exactly. Although I would love to do it later on when I feel like I'm more qualified. But what I've been doing ever since I discovered this has just been sharing it with people, like, wow, this is cool. I didn't know about this, and now I do. And here on this podcast, and also I just did an interview with a podcast called Against the Lore, which will be dropping soon. And we talked about how I went from Greek tragedy and Homer to Bedouin poetry. And I was talking to people who studied different aspects of the ancient world, and someone who was just, interested in bringing these ideas more into a modern context. And everybody was like, wow, this is so cool. I'm so glad you shared this with us. And, I think it's way more inspiring, and it gives me the energy to keep going, and to keep doing more and writing more and thinking more. And right now, what I'm thinking about is how to share more of what I'm doing beyond this sort of let's translate a proverb every Wednesday, which is kind of what I defaulted
Start
to.
a podcast. I've told you multiple times. Or a
Well,
YouTube channel. Just do that. I have a friend out there. Her name is Mindy. What she does is she goes through Plato's quotes on YouTube every day, or I don't know if it's every day, I don't know when she releases, but she does it a lot. And she goes through and examines a lot of these Plato quotes that nobody really knows about, and shows a deeper side of it, and also her understanding of it. And it's very, very well done. But it's interesting because I think a lot of people love the older stuff. They love these types of concepts, but they don't have they don't know where to look. And that's kind of the whole thing of having, if you started your own YouTube channel, you could be able to describe a lot of these things and pull up things and show people with slideshows and stuff like they're in school. Surprisingly, people don't want to learn in school, but they would like to learn from someone that they like, or learn from something that they can easily listen to. Sadly, academia teachers don't really do it in the best of light.
oh, I have so much to say about this. Okay, I'm gonna try to focus myself and my emotions here. Obviously, this is something that I have a lot of feelings about, because the only reason why I stayed in school as long as I did was because I found something I really loved. I did not see myself. Maybe my friends did. I have a friend from middle school who said, "You're going to be a professor one day," and I was like, "No, no, I'm not. I really don't like school." But Dane was right. Dane, if you're out there listening, you were right. Of course, you know that. Anyway, but I found something that I really loved and was passionate about, which was the Oresteia. And I thought that there was a story to tell about the Erinyes that hadn't really been told. And I did my best to say what I wanted to say. I don't think ultimately that I did the best that I could do. And I felt really limited in a way by having to write a thesis, because I remember posting on Facebook back when I used Facebook, when I was still trying to write up my thesis, saying, "Can't I just put on a play instead? Can't I just make a video? You know, can I create something visual, because I'm trying to say, okay, this is something you would have seen on stage, you would have experienced as a member of the audience, and it would have affected the way you understood everything else that's happened." And I think now, you know, too much time has passed, but I think now I could probably look at what I wrote and edit it and do better. But I think that we shouldn't limit ourselves in the way that we explain things. And I think that's a big part of what academia does. It says, this is what you need to produce, and this is what it needs to look like, and this is what we do, and this is how we do it. And this isn't always the best approach, depending on what you're talking about. And also, like, I think what I've noticed from being online and learning from other people, and also just being on podcasts like this one, is that people will want to learn more if they're learning from someone who really cares, who thinks it's really cool. Like, I've tuned into things that I just think, oh, well, you know, this is randomly kind of interesting. Or I have a friend who's doing something and I think, well, okay, I'll support my friend, I'll tune in. It's not something that I would have sought out, but because the people on the podcast or on the video are so passionate about the topic, I suddenly get really drawn into it. And I think that is what's missing from a lot of school, because it's so systematized and it's so much like, this is what you have to do at this time for this many hours for this many years. And, you know,
But
also just,
you're coming to grips with sadly the times right now. It's very, very hard for people to feel like they should just sit down and listen to what you're being told to them. And that's the issue with academia needing to evolve. I'm surprised there hasn't been like an idea of just opening up a giant library, filling it with a bunch of books, and having kids just spend however long a couple class periods in there sorting out and writing down their own information. I would have picked up books on physiology or some type of exercise things to dive down the fitness rabbit hole that I've been going down with for a good portion of my life now, 10 years. And it's like you start to learn more when I was incentivized to get my own library card and go to the library and just learn on my own time, even though I had graduated school. I could not sit down and read in school what they were trying to force down my throat. But they have a basic template, and sadly, there isn't a lot of really kind of getting stuff redone with academia. You would think that with all this like online education and all this types of kind of revamp of putting you back in, then taking you back out, then putting you back in and taking you back out, it would all just change up. It would find a new system to work with the new system that they're trying to push in, but it's the same stuff. It's the same basic things. And half the people don't use these things when they get out of school anyway. It's like, let someone go into a library, tell them they have free range to grab whatever books they want to learn upon. Hope they pick something good. Make sure they know how to lift a fork up to their mouth so they'll be able to eat and not starve to death. And then you let them research whatever they want to do, make them compile a bunch of notes, and then make them do a speech or something about it and find out what they learned. What did you discover? Someone finds out they found an old context book about religious studies and they dive down that rabbit hole. Good. You didn't have to teach them that. Let them decide for themselves. They're adults in a sense. Academia, they still treat you like you're in elementary school.
well, in some parts of academia, yes. And as an American, I have to say that the way that the American university is evolving is terrible, because we're going more and more in the direction of everything being systematized, and giving people participation grades in college. And it's just like, no, that's not necessary. When I was in college, I really wanted to go, because I was looking forward to being able to have a major and just spend a lot of time learning Greek and studying Latin more and reading these texts. And what I found was, it was a series of hoops I had to jump through. And then when I was a junior, I had the opportunity to take the whole year and go to Oxford. And it was a different world. My head exploded, because here in the Oxford system, you only study your subject. And that has certain drawbacks as an undergrad, because, if you're an undergrad or if you're in high school, it is a good idea to get a smattering of all sorts of different subjects, even things you don't necessarily think you're interested in. But I'm really single-minded as a person, and I knew from 7th grade that I wanted to study Latin and ancient Greek. And that's what I really wanted to do. And I just felt like I spent so much time doing arbitrary stuff to get to this point. And then I went to Oxford, and that's all you do. If you do a classics degree, you spend 4 years studying Latin and ancient Greek, and you're given a lecture list. And lectures are not seminars, so there's time for questions at the end, but basically you're there listening to someone explain something or talk about a portion of the Iliad. And now, not everybody there is an excellent teacher, because a lot of them are recruited for their research abilities, and sometimes they're really shy. And then, that's a bit awkward if you're in a lecture with someone who's afraid of the audience, and then the audience is afraid of asking questions because there's this great famous person in front of them, and that's a bit of a weird dynamic. But the best lectures are the ones where people are just really passionate about their subjects, and they're also passionate about their students. And I sat in many, many of those. And that was when I decided I wanted to be a classicist. Like, I wanted to teach this because I wanted to be in that world all the time. But nobody cared if you went to the lectures or not. I had friends who didn't go to lectures at all because they were doing different stuff, or they were going through stuff, or, it was their first year and they were a bit all over the place. There weren't participation grades. There wasn't somebody, knocking on your door in the morning saying, you better do this now. It was totally on you. So if you did it, great. If you didn't do it, that was on you. If there were consequences to it, that would be on you. And it was really freeing in a way, whereas I felt really trapped in college in America, which is why I didn't go to grad school in America, because my boyfriend, now my husband, had started an American grad school, and he was complaining about how they were treating him like an undergrad and saying, we think you should do more courses over here, because he was doing linguistics, right? And they were saying, well, you're not doing enough linguistics classes. But he'd come to that program after having done a master's in linguistics in Russia. And he had actually done a fair number of linguistics courses already in Russia, and he didn't want to sit in the same classes in America.
Yeah.
So you know what he did instead? He started studying Chinese, which is pretty intense. So it wasn't like he wasn't working. He was working a lot. And learning Chinese really helped him develop some of his ideas later on linguistic ideas later on, when he went on to his next job. So it helped him, but the system was saying, we think you should do more linguistics courses. What are you doing these electives in Chinese? Like, I don't know, he's a linguist. Maybe he should study as many languages as he can, So when you systematize things, you get to the point where the system is more important than actually doing the thing. And that image of just letting kids loose in the library was so great, because for different reasons, completely different reasons, my sister and I both decided that we wanted to be homeschooled at a certain point. And that was how we started homeschool. Now, we did sign up for distance learning programs, and I did do one class online. It was a long time ago, so we only had text chat. There was no video chat or anything. So it wasn't like we didn't ultimately have like an organized class schedule, because ultimately we did. But when we first started, we had tons and tons of books at home, and our dad was like, okay, just pick one, pick something you're interested in, read it and write a report on it, and we'll talk about it. And it really helped both of us who'd been burnt out on school for different reasons get back into what we enjoyed.
Yeah.
And I think that is really important when you're studying something, because I have so many friends who are at different levels of their studies, or who finished a PhD and now they're teaching and they're thinking, why do I feel so burnt out when this is supposed to be something I love? And I mean, the current situation aside, is of course that adds a whole level of craziness. It really, I think, has to do with just being way too system bound, and it doesn't help you. I mean, the older I get, the more anarchistic I get.
Yeah. I think that's with a lot of people. I mean, we could sit here and pull apart the academia system on problems. I mean, they got some good things I've talked about before, but there's also a lot of changing that needs to be done for more revolutionary times too. You know, they
And
expect to breed an army of people, and it's like none of these people you ever stay with, they all end up doing their own thing. So you might as well let them learn what they want to learn.
Yeah, my dream, just really briefly, my absolute dream is to create a fully online university where people, where students sign up, or people who want to study sign up and say, I'm interested in these things. And then we have a group of teachers on the other side who will go through and say, okay, yeah, I can do a seminar on that. And then we just get together and we talk, and you write things or you present things.
So
And
like
it's totally,
ResearchGate or Academia, the apps you can get for your phone, but except yours would probably be more
but
free to a user.
with live people.
Yeah, you can do that with Academia and ResearchGate, but the issue is you have to have your own educational institution like degree or license to be able to put in a password and username for them. So it's not free to access for the public. I mean, it keeps out trolls, but at the same time, if I'm trying to find out something that I want to learn about, I can't just type in. I have to make an account that has to be with an institution.
Yeah, actually, if you want, when we're off air, I've got lots of friends on Twitter who have that kind of access, because I don't right
I
now
need
myself.
podcast
So
guests, and that's how I get my podcast guests.
yeah, definitely, if you're interested in a particular topic or particular article, tweet it out and say, hey, do I know anybody who has access to this or is working on this kind of stuff, and tag me, and maybe we can get somewhere, at least in the humanities. I think I can hook you up with some people. But yeah, my dream is basically to create an online university that's focused more on just talking about or going through texts and ideas together, and not having it be like, okay, you have to do this and then you have to do that and then you have to jump through these hoops. And there would be a cost associated with it, but I would want that to basically go straight to the teachers, right? Because there's so much overhead and so much bureaucracy, and people are saying, oh, college is a ripoff, don't go to college, college is bad. And that breaks my heart, because as an American, I knew when I was young that I really wanted to study ancient Greek. And when I told people that when I was younger, they said, oh, yeah, oh, that's great. You can do that in college. So it was always like something I had to get to.
Yeah.
It wasn't something I could do right away. And so for me, like, I wanted to go to college, but also now having done that and kind of being in that world, I can see how it's absolutely too expensive. The costs are inflated and ridiculous. There's no reason for it to be that expensive. The way it's managed is completely
All
inside
right,
out and
Valerie.
backwards.
All right. We're going down a freaking rabbit hole.
So I want to disconnect the things that make people think college is bad with the actual core of it.
Yeah.
Because there's a core there that I think is valuable, and it's you can't see it anymore. It's being buried. So we need to unearth it.
It'll happen. It'll happen.
I hope
It's
so.
when, I don't know. Doubt.
The internet will help.
Yeah. But I appreciate you doing my podcast again. I want to give you a minute to be able to promote your links as well too before we wrap up the show.
Okay. Well, the only link that I think I would make sense to promote here would be my Instagram that I was talking about, where every Wednesday
Your Twitter.
Oh, right. Well, my Twitter is at Dr.
VHS Smitherman.
VH Smitherman. Yeah. And that is hard to spell. So I hope you'll put it in the description.
I just remember because VHS and then Mitherman.
Right, yeah. ITHERMAN, VHS, like the tape. Exactly. And then my Instagram, where I share the weekly Arabic proverbs, is at Dr. Valerie is in, no capitals, no spaces. And I am thinking about doing a podcast, but I haven't fully sort of settled on what it's going to be, because if I only do kind of what I'm used to doing on Instagram Live and stuff, I think that'd be pretty limited, and I don't know where that would go. And I want to have a format where I can have guests on and have it be a little bit more varied than that. So I'm still hashing out the details, but I will absolutely post about it on my Instagram and on Twitter once I get myself together, get my ideas together. So if you're interested in that, if anything that we talked about today is interesting to you, follow me in those places and updates will come.
Well, I'll link it in the description. And thanks for doing the podcast. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank.